Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock in Manhasset. Today's program, sponsored by our Racial Justice Subcommittee, features a second visit by Dr. Ramin Pirouz, who spoke here on September 21. I am Jim Smith, convener of the subcommittee. Dr. Pirouz will discuss his 2-week stint as a volunteer at Nasser Hospital in Gaza this past August. He was volunteering with the Palestinian American Medical Association, a nonprofit based in Fairfax, Virginia. Dr. Pirouz lives in Southern Maryland with his wife, Dr. Nicole Dresner, formerly of this congregation, and their 3 children. Dr. Pirouz is director of critical care at Calvert Medical Center in Frederick, Maryland. He works with a mobile clinic that provides free medical care for patients who otherwise would be unable to receive care. Since Dr. Pirouz's first visit with us, the congregation has authorized a crisis grant, amount to be determined, for humanitarian relief for Gaza from a $400,000 fund that is designated for that purpose. A committee is working on possible grantees. A second grant was authorized for hunger relief in Sudan. Among the possible organizations that I'm sure will be considered by this committee are the Palestinian American Medical Association, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which has partners working in Gaza, possibly the Interfaith Center of New York, and that center developed the Interfaith Civic Leadership Academy for diverse faith leaders. There is also an organization called the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, established in 1991 in this country. And a group in Boston called Grassroots International. As I said, the committee will be working on how much and to whom the grant money will be distributed. There will be a Q&A period after Dr. Pirouz speaks, and light refreshments will be served. Please welcome Dr. Ramin Pirouz.
Sorry, I just want to make sure this works. Right, there we go. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me back here. I spoke a couple months ago, for those of you that were here, I apologize. A lot of these slides are very similar. I only have certain pictures that I took when I was there. I don't have a huge bank of slides from which to work with, but I wanted to try to show mostly pictures that I took myself, not pictures that I got from the internet. So basically, I was in Gaza from August 8th till August 22nd, a 2-week mission. And this is essentially just a sort of almost like a diary or a summary of my experience there. So before I get started, I just want to say, when October 7th happened in 2023, it was a crushing blow, I think, to a lot of people. I just, my heart goes out to the victims of the October 7th massacre. What a tragedy. And I want to make sure that it's very clear how unequivocally I condemn what Hamas did, the horrific and heinous acts that they committed. In no way is my talk an excuse or a sort of forgiveness for what happened there. So I want to make that very clear, because I think last time there was a question after my talk that I somehow brushed over or may have sort of taken too lightly the atrocities committed on October 7th. That's not how I feel. It was horrific, and I hope the perpetrators of those crimes will one day pay for their atrocities. So let me begin. So I just want to say there's a lot of pretty horrific photos here. My wife and I went through them and blurred out a lot of the really, really horrific ones. Believe it or not, these are actually not the worst of the pictures. And then we kind of blurred out some of the images where I felt like we should show them, but some of them may have been a little bit too gruesome. Part of the discussion also with this, because I've had requests in previous talks to not show such pictures, but I think doing so would not be an accurate reflection of what I witnessed and what is actually occurring. I don't think we could have an honest discussion of this situation if people don't understand the gruesome nature of war itself and what exactly is occurring. If we have these conversations in abstract, it's not a realistic appraisal of what is going on, okay? So this isn't just for shock value, it's to try to give an idea of what exactly the situation is like there. So, basically I flew into Amman, Jordan, on an airplane, was there for about a day. And then there was a bus that took me and 22 other volunteers. About 12, 13 of us were physicians, and the rest were sort of volunteers in other specialties. People working in infrastructure, non-medical professionals. So we went from Amman, drove down with a bus, went from the border of Amman into Israel, across what's called the Allenby Bridge or the King Hussein Bridge, and then drove across the Israeli desert, the Negev desert, and into southern Gaza. So you can see the red line sort of outlining the trip. We went in through what's called the Kerem Shalom crossing in southern Gaza. It's really only probably about 2 kilometers from the Rafah crossing. In fact, you can see the Egyptian border once you cross into Gaza with the bus. That whole drive took about 3 hours. This is the security fence that basically we crossed into at Kerem Shalom. So the bus took us through this crossing, and once you get through that, you get into Gaza itself. At this point, they asked all of us, look, there is a bus leaving with previous volunteers. You're welcome to leave at this point. I will say that once we crossed into Gaza, right away, you can hear the explosions and feel some of them. Gaza is a very small area. And so at that point, about 5 of the 22 volunteers decided that they wanted to leave. It is, despite reading about it, hearing about it, and obviously being volunteers there, we're sort of more, I think, acutely aware of the situation and have all seen things on the internet. Until you actually go and feel an explosion, it really doesn't hit you. So right away, when that prospect became real, I think that's when 5 people were like, they just didn't want to do that, and very understandable. So we crossed into Gaza at that point, and as I said, it's right in the southern point. You can see that green outline on the southern border of Gaza. That is what's called the Philadelphia Corridor, that basically is that southernmost point that borders Egypt. And what we needed to do was then take a UN convoy north to a city called Deir Balah. At that point, that was the UN, sort of what's called the UN safe house. That's in central Gaza, or sort of the northern point of sort of southern Gaza, where we would then meet up with our individual NGOs and go to where we would be working. So this, what I'm about to show you, we were in 8 different UN cars, basically Jeeps, all bulletproof glasses. We had our bulletproof vests on and helmets. And we're now crossing through Rafah and driving up north to Deir Balah, to the UN safe house. Again, seen so many pictures, read so much about this, but I think all of us were just shocked by the level of destruction. The only word I could use is post-apocalyptic. It just looked heartbreaking. As you can tell, I'll never win any awards as a photojournalist, but I did my best to sort of with my phone to sort of take a short video. This is now a shorter video, just less than a minute, of basically once we got into Khan Yunis, which is the city where I would be working, of Khan Yunis itself.
Secondly, it can bomb with a small rocket if they want to target, for example, someone. Small rocket, you know.
So that explosion we saw, was that from a drone?
No, it's from F-16 or from a tank.
Okay.
Yeah. The drone, like, you will not hear the drone rocket until it's very soon to you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe you have heard they bombed Al-Aqsa Hospital 1 month ago. They actually bombed it twice, but I mean they bombed it one month ago. It was the drone rocket. They targeted a tent and they killed the only person in the tent.
So I want to also emphasize that, you know, you can see just the sheer level of destruction. You know, about 95% of all buildings in Gaza have now been destroyed. Underneath all these buildings are dead bodies. There's estimated about 10,000 bodies are buried underneath the rubble. You know, the problem is there are no caterpillars, there are no machines to remove bodies from these concrete things, so humans are able to extract some remains, but under the big pieces of rubble that humans aren't able to lift, there are just dead bodies rotting away underneath these. So this is just another picture of just, you know, the level of destruction. This is the hospital that I worked with. It's called Nasser Hospital. It's in Khan Yunis. This is actually, at the time, was the only major functioning hospital left in Gaza. About a month prior to that, the European Hospital of Gaza, which is also in Khan Yunis, was shut down due to basically Israeli defense troops basically took it over and shut it down. So now, you know, it served as the main central hub of medical care for almost the entire Gaza, or at least southern Gaza. This is a picture from the balcony. So we stayed in, you know, our living quarters or in the hospital itself. This is from the balcony of our living quarters. I took this picture. I thought it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of what is actually some beautiful, you know, some beautiful surroundings. That's the Mediterranean Sea off in the distance. You can see sort of the sunset. And then below it, just absolute destruction below it. So you see this sort of juxtaposition of beauty superimposed or sort of, you know, contrasted with the level of destruction going on there. So my job was twofold. Mainly, I'm a critical care doctor and a pulmonologist, but really I worked in the capacity as a critical care physician. So my role was to round in the 3 ICU intensive care units in the hospital, and then to respond also to the mass casualty incidents that took place. So to go down to the emergency room when a mass casualty incident would come in and respond to that. So this is the intensive care unit at Nasser Hospital. I think the first thing that struck me was just how dirty it was, the level, or I should say the lack of cleanliness. It's kind of hard to appreciate it on this, but you can see flies on the sheets, on the blankets. The intensive care unit is usually in most hospitals the cleanest, most sanitary conditions in a hospital. You know, clean conditions are essential when you're talking about patients with burn wounds, gunshot wounds, exposed abdomens, and things like that. And you can see on the patient's face is this netting. The reason for that is that flies would get in their mouth, lay larvae, and maggots would grow, just big bushels, essentially, of maggots. So they would put gauze to prevent flies from getting in. So this is a burn wound. This is a 17-year-old male, basically came in with about 70% burn wounds, and also a gunshot wound to his head. Burn wounds were extremely common. You know, I'd say about 90% of the ICU patients were due to explosive wounds and explosive injuries, I should say, and gunshot wounds. Burn wounds to this extent were just unsurvivable. Even in a U.S. hospital under ideal conditions, over 50% of a burn is really hard to recover from. in a condition where there isn't there isn't enough cleaning solutions, antibiotic ointments to care for patients like these, this is instant mortality. So this patient did pass. This is a 3-year-old child. Came in after an explosive injury with shrapnel wound to the chest and a collapsed lung. You know, when she first came in, actually, we had high hopes for her, and she was able to recover. We placed a chest tube and able to reinflate her lung, but eventually she just never woke up. There was a lot of actually patients with head trauma with negative CAT scans, unable to get MRIs in these hospitals, but with negative CAT scans that never woke up, and it's believed to be just from such severe concussive injuries that they never recovered. 3 years old, she had a mother that I met once early on in her admission, but she had 2 other children, spent most of her days looking for food to feed her 2 other children. She lived in a Mawasi camp about 10 kilometers, but you know, a good walk. She had no transportation. So she ended up passing alone by herself. We were in the room with her, but no family. So this is this one was a 12-year-old boy, gunshot wound to the head. Very common. The number of gunshot wounds was, especially to children, was just unbelievable. So gunshot wound to the head. He also passed. Most of the mortality in the ICU was due to gunshot wounds, not due to gunshot wounds, also explosive injuries. But most of the mortality was just due to eventual infections. It's sort of hard to see on this picture, but the ventilators that were used to ventilate these patients, the tubing would have to be reused. There's not enough tubing. So if someone died from a ventilator-associated infection, that same tubing would then have to be used on the next patient because there simply wasn't enough tubing. So dirty tubing is being reused from one patient to the next patient that comes in. It just shows how the lack of healthcare supplies, the number of deaths that leads to, really unnecessary. This is a 7-year-old boy that actually had a gunshot wound about 3 to 4 weeks prior to this admission. He survived initially, was sent home, and then about 10, 11 days after his discharge from the initial hospitalization, he came back in with new onset seizures due to bleeding from the tract of the previous gunshot wound. He ended up passing. So this is some updated statistics by the UN OCHA. I gave these statistics back in September. This is some updated statistics. This is from October 29th. Over 40,000 Palestinians now killed, including over 11,000 children. Really about 100,000 now injuries, of which, about 22,500 are life-altering. In the evenings, often I would walk with some of the other doctors, despite warnings from my NGO not to. I would go to just nearby stalls and just get out of the hospital for a little bit. It was just amazing, the number of patients with missing legs, missing arms, gunshot wounds. So besides just the sheer high number of deaths, the effect on the working age population, on the population as a whole moving forward due to just life-altering injuries is astounding. There's 55 evacuation orders that remain in effect, covering about 86% of Gaza. Why is that important? Because even prior to the war, Gaza is the most densely populated place on Earth. So now, take that dense population and put them in only 14% of that area. So imagine the mass of humanity in such a small area of land. So it's just the amount of overcrowding in shelters, along with the amount of water shortage, food shortage, lack of sanitary conditions, is making it just unsustainable. The lack of soap, shampoo, has led to record rates of diarrheal and skin conditions. Diarrhea diseases have increased by about 40%, and respiratory illnesses by about 20%. And again, the health crisis has now been exacerbated by the inability to facilitate aid. So now northern Gaza has become basically, this is actually outdated, but northern Gaza is now essentially not accessible by aid organizations. OCHA has not been to northern Gaza in over 100 days now, okay? Aid convoys are fired upon. They're exposed to life-threatening and life-risking conditions. They're stopped and delayed for hours in combat zones. I had my own story when trying to exit Gaza, where we had to go in an unmarked car through a combat zone, which I honestly didn't think we would make at the time, that we would survive, but we did. The International Rescue Committee has called Gaza the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker. UNICEF has called Gaza the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. And the United Human Rights Office has recently reported that 70% of fatalities are women and children. That's astounding, almost 3/4. Forget about just non-combatants, but women and children. So this is statistics from the WHO, and it just shows, again, this is only through April. Part of the problem when I try to update this talk, actually, is that it's become very difficult to attain statistics. There's so little, there's such little presence now of international aid organizations because they've been disallowed to come in there. The statistics are now very difficult to update, particularly in northern Gaza, where it's just become a barren zone, not for Palestinians, they're there, but for aid organizations and other groups, other NGOs. So, I won't go through all the details just because of time, but the number of respiratory infections, diarrheal infections, scabies and lice, skin rashes, jaundice. Why jaundice? Because of hepatitis. Hepatitis A has gone through the roof due to the poor drinking water conditions. And so people are developing fulminant liver disease from a very treatable and easy condition to recover from. So food insecurity in Gaza has become exceptionally dire. This graph from Vox shows it in comparison to two of the worst recent famines, Somalia and Yemen. And you can see in Somalia and Yemen that famine, the worst along the spectrum of food insecurity, was non-existent in Yemen, which was a horrific humanitarian disaster, and almost non-existent in Somalia. But 30% of now Gazans are considered to be under famine conditions. And this, again, was done in March of this year. It's now 7 months, 8 months later. So these numbers are only increasing. In fact, in northern Gaza, people are just dying from famine at exorbitant rates. I will say, because I think Jim mentioned it earlier, that this church is also donating money to Sudan, and that's a great thing. Sudan actually may turn into a famine condition as bad, if not worse, than Gaza, partly because of the just sheer numbers of Sudanese people. But Sudan really should be on this list, but at the time when this was made, Sudan hadn't quite entered that phase yet. So Gazans get their water through two main sources. About 90% of their water comes from the coastal aquifer. So Gaza runs right along the Mediterranean Sea, and that water runs under the land, the Gazan land, and there is this coastal aquifer under there, but it's brackish salt water. And so it has to be treated in order to become drinkable and usable by human beings. So what happens is there's aquifers that wells that access this coastal aquifer, but that water has to be desalinated in order to be consumable. All those desalination plants have been destroyed. So now that 90% of water that is in these coastal aquifers are not accessible, or not usable, I should say. They're just brackish water that you can't drink from, again, leading to diarrheal diseases, hepatitis A, and all sorts of other diseases. Furthermore, and I'll show you a couple slides of just the absolute pollution, the lack of place to put trash. So all those toxins leaching from that trash are now getting into this coastal aquifer, making it further toxic. So people have private wells that try to access these coastal aquifers, and families are just drinking it out of sheer desperation. The second source of water comes from about the other 10%, comes from pipelines that pipeline water from southern West Bank and southern portions of Israel into Gaza. But those have now been blocked off by the Israeli government, preventing water from coming from those sources also. So the sources that were coming from outside Gaza are now inaccessible. So really Gazans are down to less than 10% of the pre-war conditions, which was already considered an absolute disaster. The Gazans now have very little access to water, about 3 liters per day per person. The recommended minimum dose is about 15 liters. So they're getting about 20% of the thing. And that's just the amount. That doesn't mention the quality of the water, whether it's actually usable. So, I showed you a video basically of the absolute sheer destruction of the buildings. So most people that lived in homes now live in tent encampments. This is one of them. No, not one of them. This is us driving through some of these tent encampments. You can see people just basically set up tents wherever. There's no running water, no sewage, so people just use bathroom. When they have to go to the bathroom, they just go to the side of the tent. This is the only picture I think I did not take in this. This is one I got offline just because it gave a better idea of the vastness of some of these tent encampments. This is again walking through the Khan Yunis. I took pictures as we went through, just setting up tent encampments wherever they could. And this shows, I was mentioning earlier, that trash, landfills have become full. So because there are no, the incinerators that basically deal with all this trash, everything is destroyed. The entire infrastructure is destroyed. So trash is just piling up on the streets. You can see children playing in that trash. And the toxins from all this trash, whether it's batteries or whatever else that may be used, is leaching into through the ground and into the drinking water. You can see, there's nasty pools of water. They're all over Gaza, just walking through. The toxins that are there, it's just, I can't imagine. So this is a school that has been destroyed, basically shelled out. I'll talk in a little bit about what's called scholasticide, but the utter destruction of the educational system in Gaza. This is a school that's been shelled out, and people now live in there as opposed to setting up tents. Some people decide to put stuff in these rooms that were once the school. You can see this is that same school I just showed. That's tank artillery fire from a tank into the sides of the walls. Schools have just been destroyed. Kids have now not gone to school in about a year. 650,000 school-aged children with absolutely no access to formal education anymore. So scholasticide, that's sort of the intended mass destruction of education in a specific place. As I said, about 625,000 students have not been to school in a year now. It's now November, so it's been more than a year. Loss of students, the number of students that have been killed is astounding. Teachers, levels of higher education. There are 19 institutions of higher education in Gaza. That includes, medical schools, law schools, advanced engineering programs, mathematics, physics, all destroyed. So there's not a single institution of higher learning that's still working, functioning. This is now pictures from the hospital that I worked at, Nasser Hospital. This is the dialysis unit. So the number of dialysis patients, dialysis, for those of you who are unaware, is basically the use of a machine to act as one's kidney. Dialysis has exploded. There's way more dialysis patients now than there were at the start of the war, mainly due to crush injuries and lack of hydration and nutrition. So this was the previous dialysis unit that existed at at Nasser Hospital. You can see the hospital got taken over in March and April of 2024. Many doctors were killed, patients were killed, and many of the buildings were destroyed, including this dialysis center. This is the front of the building. So dialysis has now really become urgent when most people are supposed to receive about 3 to 4 hours of dialysis treatment 3 times per week. Now a lot of patients are getting maybe about an hour twice per week just because of the lack of dialysis units available to treat patients. This is one of the buildings that was destroyed around Nasser Hospital. This is the pictures of the interior of the hospital. As I said, the hospital got raided in March and April. Just the rooms were destroyed, absolutely, hospital beds, hospital equipment destroyed. The heads of most of the departments, the infectious disease department, the emergency department, the nephrology department, were taken basically prisoner, and they're somewhere in southern Israel, never to be heard from again since. This is just markings. You can see when the IDF troops came in, they would go in a room, clear it out, put a marking to show that they had cleared that room out. And so, because I remember when I went there, I was asking some of the people there, what are these marks that I see along all the rooms? You can see that little, I think it's a psi, Greek letter psi symbol. So this is actually, again, from my balcony, from our living quarters, and you can see that big mound there. That's actually a mass grave. 3,000 people were killed, placed on the ground, and rubble and dirt were placed over them. When the IDF troops left, the locals came by, dug up the bodies, and gave them a proper burial. But this is a mass grave. So again, I sort of touched upon it, but this is a few statistics about the utter collapse of the Gazan healthcare system. And this was a May statement by ECHO. As I said, I try to update a lot of these slides, but very difficult to get newer statistics because of the lack of infrastructure and the sort of inability of NGOs to now get into Gaza, especially northern Gaza. ECHO is the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations Organization. So they collected these statistics, but 31 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. A lot of injured people dying just due to inadequate health care. So these deaths are not due to direct injuries, due to direct deaths, but injuries resulting from those attacks. There's been 890 attacks on healthcare facilities. I want to stress something very important here also. Notice the breakdown, 890 attacks on healthcare facilities, both within Gaza, 443 in Gaza, but 447 in the West Bank. The West Bank was not part of the attacks on October 7th. Why so many attacks on the West Bank? Again, it just goes to show that it's been now used as an excuse to utterly destroy the Palestinian community as a whole, not just Gaza. 500 Palestinian healthcare workers have been killed. The healthcare workers have often been targeted when they wear scrubs outside of the hospital. So I noticed that most of the Palestinian doctors would actually change out of their scrubs into civilian clothes for fear of being targeted when they walked back to their encampments after work. So these are just some pictures from I hardly ever, during the day you're working a lot, so I really hardly ever were able to get pictures, but occasionally I was able to capture some explosions. When I was there, actually, Rafah had undergone severe bombing in northern Gaza, completely wiped out, basically. But Khan Yunis was actually the epicenter of the bombing when I was there. The nights were pretty horrific, to say the least. The weather is very hot, about 95 degrees, 100 degrees with no air conditioning, so it was difficult to sleep at nights. But all night you would just hear explosions, some of them so close that would rattle the buildings, drawers would fall over. There were many times we would all get up and just run to the balcony because we thought the building itself had been hit. Debris would come through the windows, sometimes wake up in the morning with debris just covering your legs from the debris from the explosions. They were so close within a few blocks for about 3 to 4 days. Furthermore, the noise, there's a constant hum of drones there. So there's two different types of drones, basically surveillance drones that are just able to look, that have cameras and come and sort of navigate. But then there are larger drones about the size of that, maybe the size of that piano, that actually are able to fire explosives and gunshots. But it just gives this continuous hum of drones that is constant. You know that you're constantly being surveilled, that you're constantly under the threat of attack. And for those days where the military incursions were within the vicinity of the hospital, the roar, that sort of low din of the drones became just sort of constant roar, 24 hours a day. It made it very difficult to sleep and obviously sort of nerve-wracking.
It's what?
Another explosion. So actually, my sleeping quarters were right by there. You can see the gunshot wounds, gunshot hitting the side of the buildings. That's coming from drones up above. So again, I apologize. I sort of explained earlier, I'll try not to leave these pictures on for too long, and I did blur them out. But part of my job was to come down to the ER and respond to mass casualty incidents. Let me just go back so that you don't have to keep staring at the pictures. But so, you know, besides the ICU work, we would respond to the mass casualty incidents. So we would get a call or a notification that a mass casualty was coming in. They would bring in, you know, whatever, 12, 15 patients into the ER after an explosion. They would bring them into the emergency room. There's about 4 to 5 stretchers per bay, per trauma bay. So a lot of, you know, patients would go on those, but the rest would just be on the floor. We would sort of go through triage, identify those who are alive, those who are not. The ones, you know, usually about half would be dead upon arrival. We would point them out, they would be taken out. And then the rest, you know, you'd try to do what you could, placing chest tubes, intubating, placing central lines, all would, you know, just under extremely unsanitary conditions. You know, the floors, often you're sitting on the floor trying to intubate someone or place a central line under very aseptic conditions. You know, the floors are just cleaned with water. There's really a lack of Lysol or other cleaning materials. So just water is used to try to remove the blood and the guts and brains or whatever else. So you can just imagine the stench and just the level of the lack of sanitation. So this is some of the pictures. These are all essentially children. But you can see that's a doctor, no shoes on. Most of the doctors, you know, they're working all year round without any pay. You know, and then they have to go back to the encampments at night. I'm going to kind of race through these just because of the gruesome nature of the pictures. So what would happen is, as I said, we would sort of triage those patients. The ones that were not alive would go to the nearby morgue. They would be given a quick sort of ceremony and then taken to the cemetery. This is pictures or video footage that I took of bodies being taken to the cemetery from the morgue. You can see the bodies in the white bags there. So Lancet did a study in July. Lancet is, you know, one of the larger medical journals. It's a British journal, you know, sort of the equivalent of the New England Journal here, say. And they did an analysis of what they estimated to be the death toll within Gaza. They looked at recent conflicts within the last sort of quarter century or within this century, and estimated that the actual death toll is usually about 3 to 15 times as much as the reported death toll. So if 40,000 people die, multiply that, or actually reported killed, then multiply that by 3 to 15 times. So they said even if you take conservative estimates of 4 times the amount of deaths reported, we would have been at about 186,000 deaths, okay, due to the effects of war, all right? And that number just is increasing every day, every day. And it's actually accelerating right now because of the massacres that are going on in northern Gaza. But the Lancet study, you know, again, very interesting, and it's very important because these numbers really don't reflect the level of devastation and the long-term impact that these conflicts have upon a country. This is some of the people that I worked with in the ICU, some of the doctors. Again, you know, those are the real heroes, I would say, of this story. You know, I have the luxury of coming back, being with my children and, you know, making good money, living in a nice house, you know, having all the food and buying my kids whatever toys, and, you know, having the luxuries that most Americans can have, even, you know, I guess beyond the average American being a physician. But these guys cannot. They're physicians who are making no money. They haven't got paid since since the war started. They all work about 5 days a week in the hospitals, for which they make no money. Most of them, on their 2 days off, work for organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, because they're able to make a little income directly from those private NGOs that give them some money. So they work on their days off to get a little bit of funding, to make a little bit of money to survive. And this is the beach. Actually, one night, some of the Gazan doctors took me and somebody else to the beach in Gaza. It really is spectacularly beautiful. This is the Mediterranean Sea. The scenery could be, you know, if it wasn't for the level of destruction around there, it could be quite magnificent. And it was just nice to sort of see some semblance of normalcy amongst all this craziness, and to just see kids. We played soccer with the kids, just to see kids being kids, still able to be kids for at least a few moments among all this craziness. So God bless them. God bless the people of Israel. God bless the people of Gaza. I just hope something will happen soon. Thank you.
Hello. Anyone? Thank you very much, Doctor. Anyone who would like to ask a question, please form a line.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First, I want to.
Can everybody else hear?
Can you hear?
Okay. I'll repeat the question also.
Okay. First, I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience with us. I'm just wondering if you personally, or maybe heard anything about the underground caverns and whether they were truly used for storage of munitions or hiding members of Hamas.
Yeah.
So what was the story that you got about the everyday people versus
Yeah, it's a great question, because a lot of the justification for these actions is to try to root out Hamas. And, you know, there's this often heard rationalization that Hamas is using the civilians as shields and using hospitals as sort of, you know, weapons or storage depots for munitions and things like that. The truth is, I don't know. I mean, you know, first of all, you really can't talk about it too much, because if you start discussing these things, you'll immediately lose trust within the people that you're working with, okay? All I can tell you is what I saw. I saw nothing of the sort. I saw no mention of Hamas. You know, and I'm not the only one. There's been many aid workers. Not a single aid worker has mentioned seeing Hamas, has mentioned seeing any storage of weapons. You know, these hospitals are decimated. Furthermore, with the level of Israeli intelligence, okay, you know, they were able to kill a Hamas official within Tehran, Iran, have the intelligence to infiltrate them. You think they can't infiltrate Gazan hospitals where, you know, it's security measures. People are just trying to get by and survive. There's so little security measures. There's no way that Israel can't have the intelligence to know if Hamas is actually infiltrated a hospital. So to say we see one Hamas official come in and that justifies bombing a hospital, I don't, again, can I tell you with certainty? No, I cannot, okay? My second response to that question is, and this is a moral question for all of us to answer. I know what my answer is, but we each have to make our own moral judgments, right? Is, let's say there is. Let's say worst case scenario, there is a Hamas official there walking around doing whatever. Does that justify killing 50 people? Does it justify killing 10 children? I don't know. I don't think so, but that's a judgment for each of us to make. A moral determination, a moral decision for the international community to make, and for the U.S. to make in determining whether they want to continue arming and funding this war. And again, I'm not trying to be vague. I can just tell you I saw none of it, and no aid workers that I've talked to have seen any of it. Furthermore, there's been no actual direct proof of any of it. In other words, it's just said very vaguely after each bombing of a hospital or bombing of a school, well, Hamas was there, with no direct proof, none. I don't know. Shouldn't you have to when you're trying to justify the death of 50 people, 100 people?
Sorry.
It's okay.
My name is Habib Ahmed. I'm from the Islamic Center of Logan. It's very difficult since October, in this day and age, in 2024, we are seeing a genocide, and it is my tax dollar, your tax dollar, is sponsoring this genocide. So I really feel every day that I'm responsible. You are responsible for this. And I want to salute you for your humanity. You took a big chance by going there. And I want to salute this organization. I have come here many times for the last 20, 25 years. They do wonderful work for humanity, these people here. The question, a couple of questions I have. Did you have any restrictions? Because I've spoken to some other doctors. They have come to our mosque and did a presentation like you, other people who work in this country, and they're coming and telling us what is happening there. It is really a disaster, and disaster does not, that word disaster just does not justify what is happening there. Were there any restrictions on your movements?
There.
That is one question. And how long you were there? I walked in few minutes late, so maybe you have said that. And do you have any idea how this will end? You see, now you said that was few hospitals, they're gone. Now I think there is not a single hospital as we stand.
Nasser is still running, and I think since then the European Hospital of Khan Yunis has opened up. So I'll answer your first question first. So he asked, were there any restrictions on our movements when we were there? So the NGO that I went with, the Palestinian American Organization, did advise us not to essentially stay within the hospital grounds, not to walk outside the hospital. I don't know if I should say this, but I did. Because we would see these horrific things during the day, and in the evening, there would be the news on further showing the horrors of the war, and people crying and wailing, and it just got to the point after a couple of days I was like, I got to get out of here and I need fresh air and to walk around. They told us not to for two reasons. One, bombings, the most protected place you could be is in the hospital, even though clearly that's not the safest place either, given the number of hospitals that have been destroyed. But it is safer than just walking around on the streets where you can get hit at any time by Israeli defense forces, but also because of Hamas itself. Being a foreign doctor, if Hamas had seen a foreign individual walking around and they, kidnapped you, then you're a commodity, So that's another reason not to sort of go outside. As I said, I did, not, the beach was the farthest place we went, but I would go and sit and have coffee while people smoked hookah and stuff just to get out. Just for a little bit of sanity and amongst all this craziness. So, that's with regard to local restrictions. They did, when I was there, northern Gaza was turning into even if you can call it an even greater catastrophe than southern Gaza. And they asked any of us if we would go to northern Gaza. I volunteered along with a few other people. I did want to go to northern Gaza to see it. Despite the extra dangers that it entailed. We never were allowed to go. We didn't get clearance from the IDF or what's called COGAT, which is sort of they coordinate movement within Gaza and within the other Palestinian territories. So yes, movement to northern Gaza then was starting to be restricted. Now it's absolutely restricted. So yes, movements were severely restricted. Sorry, your second question now? How will it end? Boy. How do you answer that? I don't know. Let me start off by saying I don't know. Anyone that says they do know, I think should take that with a grain of salt. I will say this. Northern Gaza is in big trouble. There's about 400,000 people there. They've been ordered to evacuate, but the roads for evacuation have been shut off. So how do they evacuate? Furthermore, a lot of people, they were starting to, even when I was there and even before that, are starting to ignore the evacuation orders. They've been evacuated 5, 6, 7, 8 times. At a certain point, you say, what's the point? And I think what people in northern Gaza, the suspicion now is that northern Gaza is going to be cleared out of all Gazans. So it will become a Palestinian-free area. And there's suspicion that Israel will put settlers within northern Gaza and just take over the land. It will become another area for settler colonization. And so people are afraid to leave even if they're at risk because they know that there's a good chance if they leave, they'll never come back. So they'd rather die on their homeland than be forced out. That's the sense I get.
One last comment I wanted to say. You did say that there were 443 versus 447. That was the
attacks on healthcare facilities.
Healthcare facility.
In Gaza and in the West Bank. And again, I think, was that from April or May statistics? That's from ECHO.
So it's a little bit higher than the Gaza itself.
Yeah, I mean, West Bank is a larger population and a larger territory. There's about 3 million Palestinians in West Bank, about little over 2 million in Gaza. So but still, why is West Bank undergoing such massive incursions and massive destruction?
You see, that is a question, why West Bank? And that tells me that this is not going to end very good for Gaza. Definitely it is not going to end very good for Palestinian period.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And that's why I put that statistic in there for that very purpose, to show that this isn't all about security within the West Bank, all these incursions. This is about, in my opinion, the ultimate goal of eradicating Palestinians, either by killing them or expulsion. And it's not limited to Gaza. It includes the West Bank. Could I just add, this isn't in response to your question, but you thanked the organization. I really want to thank this church and this congregation for giving me the chance to talk. Very brave thing that you guys have done, and for giving money to Gaza relief. it's not the most popular of topics. People don't like to talk about it. So the very fact that you've allowed me to come talk and gone even further than that by donating money to Gaza is really a tremendous reflection on how great this congregation is, and says a lot about you guys.
So I just wanted to mention for everybody's benefit that this is Habib Ahmed. We have had a relationship with him and the Islamic Center of Long Island in Westbury for a long time. And after 2001 and the World Trade Center attacks, some of our congregants actually demonstrated outside the mosque saying, "These are not the terrorists." And so, you know, Habib, we feel your pain, and we've seen you at a lot of interfaith worship services, and we all are with you in spirit.
Ramin, I just want to point out, so everybody knows, this one of the reasons we have Ramin come back here was because this presentation is being taped. It's on YouTube, and it will be on YouTube. There's a link there if you go there. So it's not only for today, but if you tell anybody else, they can access this presentation. That was the purpose of bringing Dr. Pirouz back, and to publicize what his experiences were, so we knew some other facts that you might not get otherwise.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, did you find your time in Gaza meaningful to yourself personally? And were you able to help people?
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys heard that, but the question was, did you find your time in Gaza meaningful personally? And did you find my work helpful? Yeah, look, it was an experience that obviously I'll never forget. I'd been to West Bank in 2012 and volunteered there for a little over, I think, three and a half weeks. And that was a very different experience. You know, there it's more about sort of humiliation. This is more just absolute destruction. As to whether, you know, part of the thing, actually, interestingly enough, is so many of the hospitals have been destroyed, and not long before I went, the European hospital had shut down. That was the other large functioning hospital there. So a lot of those doctors had come over to work because nowhere else to go, right? So there was actually quite a lot of ICU physicians. So from that perspective, I don't know if they needed my sort of, you know, thing, and it needed my actual work from that perspective. I think one of the main things that someone like me could do there is foreign professionals, foreign physicians, foreign doctors provide some level of protection for the local population, actually, because it's horrible to say this, but a couple foreign doctors that are killed to the international community, unfortunately, means more than if 1,000, 2,000 Palestinians get killed. So they're very hesitant. I think people are very hesitant to kill a foreign doctor. So we, in some sense, provided some protection for the locals and continue to for those aid workers that go there. And the other thing is, because journalists have now been banned from going there, there are essentially there are local journalists, but they report mainly within Gaza. But a lot of pictures and reporting has now been essentially banned. There's just very little journalists that are able to go there and report on what's going on. So a lot of the reporting and reflections on the on-the-ground situation is by physicians and other aid workers. So that, I think, is almost the more important and vital role here than the actual medical work being done. And so it's why anyone that asks me to come speak, I will, you know, just because, you know, that's, to me, the more important thing is to try to get the word out, let people know about what's actually going on. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your important and very, if difficult, talk.
Thank you.
I also want to thank you for your service that you did.
Thank you very much.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where the pressure needs to be put to increase the likelihood of aid getting in and for alleviating the horrific humanitarian crisis.
Sure. So the question is, where does pressure need to be placed? And if I rephrase your questions incorrectly, let me know. But where does pressure need to be placed to increase the amount of aid that comes in? So, again, that's a question I've been asked a lot. What can be done? I think, first of all, is to just enforce the law. Okay, both American law and international law. There's something called the Leahy Law, which was passed, I think, in 1997 under the Foreign Assistance Act, which prevents arms and financial support to countries where humanitarian things are being done. Some people have called for the Leahy Law to be used and implemented such that aid and both military and financial aid towards Israel is stopped until these humanitarian atrocities are ceased. So that's one thing, is for American legislators to simply apply American law, which has been passed. The second thing is to apply international law. International law, partly by the Geneva Convention and other humanitarian measures, forbid military incursions that primarily affect civilian populations. So 70% of the victims are women and children. It's hard to argue that that this is a military operation that is primarily targeting Hamas itself when those numbers are so astounding. So apply international laws, and apply them without exception. Because if you make exceptions to humanitarian and international laws, they all go away. You can't. Then it weakens international law in other areas as well. When you don't apply them to certain areas, they have to be applied uniformly. What can be done? I don't know. I unfortunately, I don't want to get into what happened with the election, but I think as bad as the Biden administration was with regards to this issue, I think it's going to get worse. Trump has flat out said that it has told Netanyahu, you do what you have to do. You have carte blanche, essentially, to do what you have to do. Just do it quickly. In other words, we don't like the political and blowback we're going to get from this, so just do it fast so that people forget about it. And so as much as you want to condemn Biden, Harris, or whatever they've done, and they should be, I actually think it's going to get worse. I don't know, it's very difficult to give concrete measures as to what can be done when international law applies to weaker countries and not to powerful countries. If I knew the answer, I would tell you. And I don't mean to sound so pessimistic. I would love to give you concrete measures that we could all do, but we can't not pay our taxes so as to not fund these without incurring harsh repercussions, right? So what do? All you can do is talk, discuss, educate, and hope that humans will come to their senses and stop this nonsensical killing and inhumanitarian behavior. I'm sorry for the vague answer. I just don't know what else to say. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sitting here and listening to this. I have many, many Israeli relatives.
Yeah.
And my personal feeling, and I know my feelings don't count over there, I'm just one American, is that there needs to be a two-state solution.
Yeah.
And I know that Netanyahu has not agreed to that. But that's what I see as the answer.
Sure.
So I just needed to say that.
Yeah. So, that brings up another very interesting topic, is this idea of a two-state solution versus a one-state solution versus any other options that may be out there. I think, I initially sort of myself believed in a two-state solution. I no longer do. I'll tell you why. In 2012, when I went, and things, it's 12 years later now, it's 2024, the number of settlements within the West Bank are so many. They're so integrated within the West Bank itself that it just makes a two-state solution. In other words, yes, all of these illegal under international law. But since 2012, that has only expanded. In fact, the level of settlement building has increased, ramped up more and more and more, again, all in contravention of international law. So the problem is it's just become so, the settlement population and the land that has been now taken within the West Bank is so large that it is impossible, I think, to set up a contiguous West Bank land that can function as a second state, So I think now I believe in sort of a one-state solution. What that means is basically one state with a secondary class of citizens, the Palestinians, that will just have to fight for their rights, just like the Bantustans did in South Africa under the apartheid movement, just like Black Americans did under the civil rights movement, and do their best to survive, to flourish in horrific conditions. But I don't see any other way. I don't think a two-state solution is feasible where I once did.
I want to applaud you for your service, for your courage.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if my family were in this situation and if I were Palestinian, I would want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Are other countries allowing Palestinians to come to their lands, to their shores? And if not, why?
Yeah, so that's a great question because it sort of leads into what is the degree of culpability of other Arab nations and non-Arab nations in dealing with this situation. First of all, there's sort of almost two different situations here. One is the Gazans themselves. They don't have that option. Even prior to the war, Gaza is an enclosed, encirculated piece of land. People aren't free to move in and out. So most Gazans have not ever left Gaza. And it's hence why the moniker, the largest open-air prison in the world, because it's surrounded by that security fence that I saw you. People aren't able to come in and out. So Gazans themselves can't. They're landlocked. They're not landlocked because they're by the Mediterranean Sea. They aren't able to come in and out freely, okay? Even if they were, I think most secular, educated Palestinians would love to get out, and a lot have. They would love to bring their children to come get educated at an American university or European places of higher learning, but it's tough a lot of places, especially these days when these, far-right movements have really become anti-immigrant. The level of acceptance and welcoming for foreign populations is dwindling, okay? So even if they're able to, it's become very difficult for them, even if they're able to get out of Palestine itself, to have the means to do so. Okay, it takes money, right, to go to a foreign land where you have no money, no job, don't speak English or German or Spanish or wherever you want to go to, right? It's a very difficult thing to do for a population that is extremely poor. So some of the wealthier, more affluent Palestinians have done so. And so what it does is like a brain drain, and it just makes the situation even worse, okay? But I do think part of the goal of Israel is to just force or expel Palestinians from their land, to essentially overtake it. And so they would love that. But again, the realities of doing so is not easy. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention that last questioner is Sonia Aurora, our new social justice coordinator, and I wanted to thank her for working with Dr. Pirouz and the Dresners and Penny Lane to set up the logistics for this program. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us for refreshments, and please give another round of applause to Dr. Pirouz.
Thank you, everybody. Jim, do you